Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I am a detrans male. If you haven't watched my previous videos, I'll give a quick summary of my story before diving into the main topic today, which is why I transitioned in the first place. So when I was 28 years old, I started identifying as trans and I got on male to female hormones. I was on those hormones for 8 years. Didn't have any surgery or anything like that, but and then 8 years later, when I was 36, I decided to detransition. That was about 5 months ago, back in May of 2023. And I have since socially detransitioned, going by, a masculine name. I, wear more masculine clothing in my day-to-day life. I identify as a male. I am embracing my male body, who I am. Being male or identifying as male no longer bothers me, nor does identifying as a man or reclaiming my manhood in some way, whatever that means. But most importantly, I have come to terms with the foundational biological reality of who I am and being male, being born male, having a male body, etc. And now, my body is running on testosterone as a, normal male does. So in previous videos, I talked about, why I detransitioned, which was mostly due to health reasons. You can watch the first video on this channel for more information about that. But in this video, I wanted to talk more about why I transitioned in the first place. So to explain why I transitioned, I need to go back to my childhood. So when I was very young, pre-puberty, I was a young boy and I had these, cross-gender fantasies about, being turned into a girl or, being forced to be turned into a girl. These very early, experiences of gender and fantasies about, being forced to be turned into a girl. And I also had a very intense interest and desire in women's clothing, and the only clothing I had access to, was my mother's clothing. So when I had an opportunity, I would, steal her clothing and wear it, and this made me intensely aroused, and it made me feel really, really good inside. And so from a very young age, I had these, cross-gender, cross-dressing, sensation-seeking, arousal experiences. And, those were with me through my entire life, and they're still with me today, which I'll talk about later. So I've always had an interest in cross-dressing. That's kind of like the foundational element of my entire gender experience, as a trans feminine person, why I transitioned. When I got access to the internet when I was a teenager, this gender cross-dressing stuff got connected to porn. Specifically, I eventually discovered pre-op trans female or trans woman porn, and I just really liked the combination of like a feminine body plus a penis. Another way to phrase that is I really liked the idea of a feminine male. That really turned me on, and it continues to turn me on. I am really attracted to feminized males, and to some extent, that association of cross-dressing and being attracted to feminine males, trans women in this pornography, that was sort of like my first exposure to transness. But I never really thought that being a trans woman was for me, because I just always identified as a cross-dresser. I had these cross-dressing fantasies, and cross-dressing was something I just did in private, and it was like a secret thing I was very shameful about, or I carried a lot of shame and guilt around this. And I went through various cycles of, secretly buying all these things, and then, then eventually purging them and going through these buy purge cycles, which is very common for crossdressers. You hear that purging story all the time. And when I was young, I, got caught by my parents wearing my mom's clothes, and, I got grounded, I got in trouble, I got shamed, I got, read Bible verses. And so I carried a lot of intense shame around these desires. But they stayed with me. They never went away. They just kind of like, I would repress them, and then, they would come out in secret behind closed doors in the privacy of my home. Most of my partners and girlfriends knew about them, but they were never like super duper encouraging. They sort of knew about it, but they didn't really like, oh yeah, you should totally embrace this and like turn it more into a thing and let's explore it together. It was always kind of like something they knew about, but I still nevertheless did it when I was kind of by myself at home. And it was always, in the context of, arousal, and sort of like it was, shameful and secretive, but highly arousing wearing women's clothing. Later, when I was like 27, 28, after years of keeping this inner feminine self, buried within me, I was seeing a therapist at the time. I was talking to her about my cross-dressing, and this was like 2015. The trans women were big in the media, Caitlyn Jenner, Laverne Cox, all this stuff, the trans tipping point. And, she was like, oh yeah, your story kind of sounds like Caitlyn Jenner. And then I watched this interview with Caitlyn Jenner, and Caitlyn Jenner also had this long history of secretive cross-dressing. And so I was like, wow, you can have a long history of secretive cross-dressing and be this like, trans woman. Maybe I'm a trans woman. So I started, doing, all this research on the internet about trans stuff. And, the very first thing I latched onto was bi gender. I was like, oh, I can identify as a man and a woman at the same time. That sounds like me, because I have this secret inner, binary self. And, a little bit prior to this, I'm kind of getting my order of operations out of whack here, but I kind of publicly came out as a cross-dresser on Facebook, actually. And I was sort of no longer wanting to hide the fact that I was a cross-dresser. And so I came out in public, and I started, wearing women's clothing openly out in public, socially, going to the grocery store or whatever. And then, I kind of quickly realized that, being a cross-dressing male publicly and openly is not really like a great way to develop a career or respect or, have any semblance of social respectability. But here's this trans woman stuff happening, they're respected and validated. And like being a trans woman seemed to me at the time to be much more supported socially as like a construct that you can fall into, versus being, a cross-dressing feminine guy and embracing a male identity while being a cross-dresser. Like the term cross-dresser has just always been sort of like a taboo thing. It's like connected with like transvestite or something. And, so it didn't have the same social cachet as being a trans woman. So I kind of like did my internet research, watched all this stuff, and just and started reading like Reddit, trans Reddit. And I just completely latched onto the trans identity, and I embraced being a trans woman at first. Later on, I came to dissociate from, the trans woman category, and I just embraced being like non-binary, trans feminine. I never really claimed like, full-blown womanhood for myself. I just always like I'm trans, I'm feminine. That's all you really need to know about me. I'm a trans feminine person, that's it. I got really into trans stuff. I was trans for 8 years. I very much, enjoyed it. It was great. It led to a lot of, self growth and processing and understanding my gender. And I kind of finally integrated my male self with my feminine self, and I combined them into one person. That person was Rachel. And Rachel had a good life, Rachel, found, a great career that I'm still in today in technology. Rachel met a lovely person who became my wife, who I'm still married to today, and is fully supportive of both my, detransition, as her husband now. I married her as a wife, but now I'm her husband. And she supports me in my gender, explorations, my cross-gender, explorations, because I've come to realize, like, when I first detransitioned, I kind of swung the pendulum so far into this like masculine role, where I wanted to be this masculine person who has a masculine gender role, who only wears masculine clothes, and is like, I want to be this like confident, dominant, masculine man. And I sort of been doing a lot of reflection over the past few months since I detransitioned. I'm still, involving all this stuff. It's kind of an ongoing process. I'm just kind of sharing my journey on YouTube. But I eventually realized that I, don't need to be this super masculine man all the time. Like, I enjoy being masculine and passing as like a regular, normal masculine dude in like my work life. Going up to the grocery store or going out or whatever. I don't have to blend in. I can easily blend into society. I don't have to worry about passing and all this like, toxicity around like trying to be something I'm not, and trying to worry about like passing, as like feminine or a woman or whatever, like out in public or at work, and worrying of like, oh, are people going to misgender me? How are people going to perceive me? But so I like being, a masculine guy out in the world for most of regular situations. But I realized I don't need to be that masculine guy like all the time. Like, I can also continue to, indulge in these cross-gender, desires that I have that, are rooted in arousal. And when I first transitioned and I started living as a woman full-time, wearing women's clothing full-time, and I went on, male to female hormones and suppressed my testosterone, eventually the arousal element like went away almost entirely. It just became normalized. It no longer became special, or it stopped being arousing. It just became a normal part of life. But later on, now that I've detransitioned and my body is full of testosterone again, and I have like a male libido, and also because I'm not wearing women's clothing all the time, when I do wear it now, it becomes arousing. And, I'm exploring, cross-gender, play. And, I don't necessarily have to take on this whole identity as a trans person in order to explore this feminine aspect of myself. I can just explore it to the extent my desires want to do that. And I don't have to pretend I'm like this masculine, super macho guy all the time, 24/7. But I also don't have to deny that I'm male. I don't have to construct this like 24/7 trans woman identity that I maintain at all times, at all costs, and make people feel bad about misgendering me because I sound male, I look male, I have the body of a male. So, I'm no longer like upset when people misgender me, because, I'm just a male person who happens to have these deeply embedded desires for women's clothing and I still have, some small breast tissue development from the hormones. So in many ways, I like where my body and my brain and my, comfort level with masculinity and femininity is right now. And my wife is fully supportive. Like, she, is fully supportive of me continuing to explore these, cross-gender, feminine things in, the context of our home life. Because, like, she doesn't need me to be this masculine guy all the time. Like, I can indulge in these, you know, cross-gender desires. And, you know, but finally admitting that, like, I like, the biggest thing for me is coming to terms with the shame I felt about the arousal aspect of my cross-gender experiences with women's clothing. Because for so long I had so much shame about this, but my trans experience of living as a trans woman for 8 years, I no longer have that shame where I can, like, admit that, yes, like, this is the reason why I transitioned. I ultimately detransitioned, but I still have these desires and I still have the arousal aspect. It's hardwired into me. I cannot change that aspect of who I am. And, you know, there's a lot of psychological and theories out there about why that is. And I'm not going to talk about them because they're controversial, but, you know, there's theories out there that explain, you know, the nature of this cross-gender arousal and connecting with trans identities, trans, you know, feminine identities. I'm not going to talk about them, but I'm just describing my personal experiences and, like, what caused me to transition, why I detransitioned, and why I'm okay with still being a masculine person who also occasionally dips into and indulges my feminine side that has a sexual component, that's had a sexual component since I was a little boy. And I don't have to be ashamed about that because there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, you know, being gay or whatever. It's just a part of who I am. It's like a sexual orientation. It's just part of who I am. There's nothing wrong with it. And I just need to embrace it and talk about it openly without shame. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot more to be said here, but this has been weighing on me for quite some time. I just wanted to come out and, like, openly discuss and give the true, honest reason of why I transitioned. Yeah, there you go. Thanks for listening.